Welcome in the latest episode of that SEC podcast brought to you by Twisted Tea and My Bookie. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter. And it's Tuesday, which means no cousin Shane, but we got our guy, Stephen Lassan, going to go on a deep dive all around the SEC. And he's even got some bowl projections for us. Never quite done that, but it's bowl time now. So getting down to the final stretch here. So interesting thoughts from Stephen. We'll get to that in just a minute. But a lot of quarterbacks banged up around the SEC. So let's get the latest on that from Brian Kelly. Florida desperately needs a win. LSU playing at home, Tiger Stadium. Will Jayden Daniels play against Florida? Yet to be determined. But here's what Brian Kelly had to say about it on Monday.
Jayden Daniels this week and what the plans are for him, and then your thoughts now that on the hit and anything that y'all might review at the office.
Yeah, I think I would consider him day to day. He's going through the injury protocol, and he's made improvements. But this is a process that we'll just have to, see how it plays out from day to day. But I can tell you that he's made some progress.
And, of course, he was going to be asked about targeting and all that. Should that have been targeting, all that? So here's Brian Kelly on the hit that knocked Jayden Daniels out of the Alabama game and virtually made it to where the Tigers had no shot in this one.
Yeah, look, we want to protect the quarterback, and certainly there was a penalty on the play. Targeting is looked at by the replay officials. They had plenty of time. I think we even went to there was a timeout there as well. So there was plenty of time to look at it. They must have felt that there wasn't targeting. We sent it into the league office because we felt like it checked all the boxes. But again, we want to protect the quarterback here, obviously.
All right, so no surprise. I mean, he was not going to bury the refs or anything like that, but I don't know. I feel like he's biting his tongue a little bit there, but is what it is. Another quarterback, speaking of Alabama, may not be suiting up against the Crimson Tide. That's Devin Leary, who got hurt in the Mississippi State game last weekend. Mark Stoops playing coy, which kind of leads me to believe even more that Devin Leary may not suit up. Here's what Mark Stoops had to say on his starting quarterback, Devin Leary, on Monday.
Great game.
Are you all hands on deck?
Yeah, we should be. I mean, we'll see. It's Monday, and there's always some bumps and bruises, but everybody is this time of year, and we'll see where we're at.
Mark, did Devin get something in his eye? Was it a head injury? Do you expect anything long term?
Yeah, I just again, I already commented on that once. I'll just stay away from it. I mean, yeah, he was having a hard time reading off the wristband at that particular moment. He could read it now.
There were times earlier.
So again, not a ton there. These coaches sensing a theme here, not wanting to give crucial information away, and that's the same thing with old Jimbo Fisher, who there's all kinds of reports that Max Johnson's got a cracked rib, broke rib, something's up. I don't even know if that's officially what's up with him. But here's Jimbo on Monday on the status of Max Johnson going into this Mississippi State game. And remember, they're down Connor Wigman already. If they're out Max Johnson, down to third-string quarterback, could make things dicey going into this critical Mississippi State matchup.
Update on Max Johnson and Le'Veon Moss?
Le'Veon, we got tackled. He's walking around. I mean, it's not a tear, no surgery. Just looked like some of the swelling's really come out. So hopefully we'll be go day to day on that. Max finished the game had a couple tough shots, but we'll wait and see how it goes. But he should be good. I mean, I'm planning on him playing. Hopefully, we'll see as it goes day by day.
And then one more that this clip I was just too good not to play. I thought, but Sam Pittman was asked about that end of the game situation. If you missed it, Florida was driving, trying to get down there to kick a field goal, game-winning field goal, and they complete a pass, and then they run their field goal unit onto the field, and Graham Mertz is trying to spike the ball, so he's waving them off. They had about 22 players on the field at one point, which I would imagine is a substitution. So Arkansas was trying to substitute. They got flagged for too many men. Florida got flagged for, I don't know exactly what it was, but I think it was, obviously for having 22 players on the field at all this madness. There was 8 seconds on the clock. The clock was running. The refs decided that wasn't really running because it was a first down, even though the clock was running. And they gave them an opportunity to kick the game-winning field goal, which they missed, which set up the overtime that Arkansas won. So explained all that to get to this quote from Sam Pittman. I just thought this was fantastic.
Other one was just they had made a mistake. They didn't go into substitution protocol. In their opinion and my opinion, if they would have 8 seconds to get their field goal unit off the field, get their team on the field, give us 3 seconds before we have to substitute. Those 8 seconds are gone, and honestly, that field goal attempt should have never been attempted. Luckily for us, I don't know how you feel if the good Lord has an opinion about who wins or not, but he got a lot of things going on, but lucky for us, and I hate it for the young man, but luckily justice was served on that one.
Sam, you got
to. The ball don't lie, as they say, and it certainly didn't in the swamp last weekend. But all right, we're going to get into that and a lot more with our buddy Stephen Lassan, senior editor over there at Athlon Sports. All right, so it's Tuesday, so you know what that means on the show. It means it's a Stephen Lassan Tuesday, senior editor over there at Athlon Sports. Stephen, what's up, buddy?
Hey, Mike, it's good to be back. Thanks as always for having me on. What a great weekend of games. I mean, starting on Saturday early with Arkansas, Florida, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, continued in the afternoon with Georgia, Missouri, at night, Alabama, LSU, just an all-around excellent weekend of games in the SEC. I can't wait to get to this weekend's games too, because it's another great slate.
Yeah, I can't remember, Stephen, the last time the noon window had 3 games, SEC games that went down to the wire like it did last week. So maybe we just start right there. The one that was just, I didn't realize these two seemed to hate each other as much as they do. I knew the coaches did, but Ole Miss hangs on to beat Texas A&M. Wild game. Ole Miss had the momentum early. A&M comes fighting back. And A&M actually had a lead late in this game, but Ole Miss. Here's the thing. I heard it described this way, Stephen. Let me know if you think this is accurate. Ole Miss, under Lane Kiffin, they know how to win these games. They've, I'm not sitting here saying they win every game, but they know how to win these tough games that go down to the wire. And at A&M, they don't know how to do it. And I think it's as simple as that.
I think what was telling to me about the game, and I think this is some credit to Texas A&M, I thought once Ole Miss jumped ahead and when they were attempting that field goal, that it was going to be a blowout. And so credit to A&M for coming back and fighting and make it a 4-quarter game, because early on it looked like Ole Miss was about to run away with it. But, I think in the kind of my takeaway in this game was sort of what you were hinting at, and that is simply just finding ways to win in the SEC sometimes is hard. And if you're Ole Miss, you're staring at the month of November with a trip to Georgia and the look ahead factor. And, you're playing a team in Texas A&M that, the defensive front matched up well against the Ole Miss rushing attack. Simply just finding a way to win is a big deal. So I think credit to A&M for fighting in this game, making it a 4-quarter game, but also credit to, like you said, Ole Miss finding a way to also win a close physical contest with a major matchup looming and a lot at stake in the month of November.
Yeah, and that game even featured a nut shot or two. So that was it was just wild. But it kind of goes without saying, Stephen, we're kind of done with Jimbo Fisher. We have been for a long time. I don't know if you've seen this stat, Stephen. I'm gonna I want to have a little guessing game here with you. They're Power 5 coaches with the worst record the last 18 games against Power 5 opponents. Who do you think is dead last? And I'll give you a hint. He coaches in the SEC.
Is it Clark Lee?
Okay. You nailed that. Okay, so he's 2-16. So he's the worst. The next worst coach is in the Big Ten. Do you have any idea who that is?
How about Tom Allen of Indiana?
Yeah, you nailed it. He's 3-15. So he's the second worst. And then there's one in the Pac-12. Do you have any idea who that is?
So this is spanning what years would this be spanning?
I guess the last two and a half years, last 18 games against Power 5 opponents.
I was going to guess Jed Fish of Arizona, but they're a lot better this year, so that's probably not a good guess.
No, it's Justin Wilcox, 4-14. But then here we get to the Jimbo Fisher reign. Jimbo.
We just glossed over old SEC friend Justin Wilcox, too.
Jimbo Fisher, 6-12 in his last 18 Power 5. And there's three other that are right there with him, Stephen. Dino Babers, Syracuse. Matt Campbell, Iowa State, used to be a hot candidate. And then Greg Schiano down there in Rutgers. But in what world, Stephen, is this acceptable where Jimbo is right here with Matt Campbell, Dino Babers, and Greg Schiano?
It's unacceptable. And I think as you were talking there, the first thing that went through my mind was those jobs are often really difficult jobs. Vanderbilt, Indiana, California, Iowa State, and the others. Those are hard Power 5 jobs. That's not the case at A&M. You know, the talent, the money, the resources, the willingness to build championships, that is Texas A&M. And we've said it a lot. Jimbo has just not adapted throughout his career. And I think they had to force, an offensive coordinator hiring just to get him to make some tweaks. I think if you wanted to make the case of why he should come back next year, it simply starts with they've lost some close games to good teams. They have Connor Wigman coming back. They'll probably bring in some good recruits from the portal or on the recruiting trail. But this also gets at the Ole Miss game. They have to beat some of these teams at some point. They've been trending in the wrong direction. When you're going 3 or 4 years without finishing in the top 25 at Texas A&M, that's a real problem. You can look around the rest of the country too. I mean, Steve Sarkisian has Texas in the mix to make the college football playoff in year 3. Mike Norvell is year 4 at Florida State. Brent Venables, they lost last weekend and lost 2 in a row. But before then, they were in the mix to be a playoff team this year too. So there are a lot of alarming signs to me at Texas A&M, and to me, it's just going to be the same old next year if Jimbo Fisher is back.
Yeah, and speaking of alarming, Stephen, Arkansas goes down to Gainesville, wins in overtime, first win ever in the swamp. What thoughts on Arkansas and their offense? With a new offensive coordinator, Kenny Guyon, the interim, I guess we can call him that. But there's been a lot of them, Stephen, but this may be the worst loss yet for Billy Napier.
Yeah, I think maybe it's easier to start with Arkansas because I think let's give some credit to the Razorbacks for this season continuing to fight and continuing to show up every week, despite the losing streak, despite the disappointment, despite everything that's gone on, to go down to the swamp with an interim offensive coordinator. And I know Florida's it's not top 10 Florida like we've seen in the past. That's still a really good win for a team kind of in this position. So I think a lot of credit goes to Sam Pittman and the staff to go with an interim offensive coordinator, to go on the road and to put up the numbers that they did offensively. I mean, that was their season high against an FBS team in points and rushing yards and total offense, averaging 6.1 yards per play. I think one of my favorite things about that game was the fact that, hey, game on the line, KJ Jefferson basically just said, look, I got this. I'm going to win this game for us. And in overtime, he took the ball and they went down the course and scored. So that looked like the KJ Jefferson we thought we would see earlier this year. So I think a lot of credit to Guyton and Pittman for getting Arkansas back on track. We'll see if they can continue to build on that. But fresh start, fresh energy. It made a big difference there for the Razorbacks on Saturday, just like Sam Pittman was looking for.
Yeah, you just got me thinking about something here, Stephen. And again, complete hypotheticals here, but I'm just curious where you go, because this, not a lot of people talk like this, Stephen, but this is a reality of college football in 2023 and moving forward. But, this is the first time KJ looks like KJ, I thought.
Agreed.
Maybe that LSU game, he was pretty good, but I mean, this was vintage KJ. And I don't know. I don't know if he's got a future in the NFL. And that's not me slighting him, because I don't think you can find someone outside of that state, Stephen, that's on the KJ train more than me. So I'm not trying to be disrespectful. But, I mean, and hell, he may have, I hope he does have an NFL future. But, he's going to get a grade at the end of the year, and it's probably going to tell him a low round grade, and he still has a season of eligibility because of the COVID year. So I'm about to throw a lot at you, Stephen, so be prepared here. But A, should he return, do you think? Because I think this year has hurt his stock considerably, and it's probably not even his fault. It's because of the coordinator. And should he return? That's A. And if he's expressing any interest in returning, I think you got to bend over backwards to make him happy, because I think we're in dire straits without KJ at Arkansas. So if let's say he does express he wants to come back, how involved would you have him in certainly you're not going to let him pick the next offensive coordinator, but I would imagine you bring guys in and you sit KJ there with him. I mean, I don't think that's going too far. Or C, and this is the part where I was saying, this is how people are talking now. So I think it's fair game. Now I want him to stay at Arkansas. I want him to be an Arkansas legend. But should he decide to come back, and should he decide, I think I hurt my stock here this year, I'm going to go into the portal. And someone's probably going to pay me, and they'll pay him at Arkansas too. So I'm not saying they're not paying him, but he'll probably get $1 million offer in NIL, and he'll get to choose somewhere. By God, imagine if it was like Georgia or something, or Tennessee, or I'm just completely speculating, LSU. But all that, would you return? How involved would you be in letting him pick or involving him in the next offensive coordinator? And could you see him jumping in the portal and going that route?
I think the last one might be the easiest one to answer first, is because I think if you're KJ Jefferson and, first of all, I think you mentioned Arkansas legend. I would argue he's probably an Arkansas legend already after leading that win to Florida, considering the circumstances of where Arkansas was coming into that game. But I think if he wanted to enter the portal, I think he'd be one of the top quarterbacks in the portal this offseason. He would have suitors, Power 5 teams, playoff contenders, other contenders and conferences. He would be highly, highly sought after. If I was KJ Jefferson, I would probably come back. And I think for the reason is, and it goes with your second question there. At North Carolina, Drake May lost his offensive coordinator, and he lost Phil Longo to Wisconsin. There's another former SEC friend there. Mac Brown involved Drake May in that coaching search. They wasn't necessarily that he was picking the offensive coordinator, but he was involved. I think if you're Sam Pittman, keeping Jefferson number one, if you're there, if you're Sam Pittman and you are the Arkansas Razorbacks head coach next year, your path to being the head coach in 2025 starts with KJ Jefferson. So I would say whatever you got to do with NIL, involving him in the coordinator search, however you have to keep him, whatever, if he wants to learn more, this concept, that concept, whatever it is, I think you pitch that to him. He can be involved in the coordinator search, because really his performance next year probably dictates Sam Pittman's stock for 2025. So I would like to see him come back personally, just as a fan of loving watching him play. And I think it'd make Arkansas a lot more competitive, even though Jacoby Criswell, the backup, has some interesting skill set. Jefferson is just one of the best in the country.
Yeah, everybody loves the backup till he's actually playing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
And it's like, oh God, there's a massive drop off.
Yeah, I think we could safely say that KJ Jefferson, this coming into the season, I had him top 10 in the country. I would have him probably top 15, despite all of what's happened this year. I think if he comes back and they get the right coordinator, I think he can rebound. And I think we talked a little bit about this. I think Sam Pittman, the fact that they fixed the defense, I guess to some extent this offseason, would give me confidence that he can go out and hire a coordinator. If it's Guyton or if it's someone else, they did a good job of hiring assistants for defense. And I think you have to be, if you're an Arkansas fan, maybe encouraged that Pittman could do the same offensively and also take that side of the ball to the next level next year.
Yeah, and so on the other side, Stephen, tough loss, Billy Napier. I mean, they have to win one of these games here to make a bowl, and they got blanking this week.
LSU and
at
Missouri,
LSU,
Florida State.
at Missouri, yeah, Florida State was at home, but they're undefeated. I mean, good God! And I don't know if you saw this stat, Stephen, from a friend of the show, Zach Goodall over there at Sports Illustrated, who covers the Florida Gators. With one more loss, which is, I mean, given that slate, is almost guaranteed, Napier would be guaranteed to possess the fewest number of wins of any Florida head coach through 2 seasons on the job since Charlie Pell in 1979-1980, who went 8 wins, 14 losses, and 1 tie. So, I mean, we're setting records here under Billy Napier, and they're the wrong kind. You know what?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I've been wrestling with in my mind while watching Florida this season is preseason expectations kind of put them at 5-7, 6-6. So the destination may end up where we thought, but I think it's the path that may concern you a little bit, because it does feel like they're making the same mistakes over and over again, and especially on special teams. And I think this offseason is going to be pretty important for Napier for a little self-reflection on, where does he see himself as a head coach in this conference? Because I think he's got too much on his plate. Trying to be offensive coordinator, not having a special teams coach. He's got, with as many staffers as they have, they should not be having people with the same number on the field, all the penalties that we've seen. So I think some reorganization of your staff. I also think I would agree with Napier in the rebuilding project, though. You have to build through the freshman ranks. We look at what Georgia, look at what Alabama, look at Ohio State, Michigan. You build through your freshman classes and you supplement through the portal. So I agree with that approach. I think the problem is this is Florida. It's not a second or third tier job in college football. It's one of the top 10 to 12 in the nation. And, at some point, your positivity, your recruiting momentum has to start translating into wins and more proof of concept. And we've seen bits of that. We just haven't been able to see it over the course of the full season. So, losing record last year, on track, I think fair to say to have another one this year. So we're kind of in this weird space where I don't know what to make of them, because it does feel like the direction is right. But at some point, they are going to have to take a big step forward, and that step forward may just be youth next year turning into more production and maybe a little bit more usage of impact players from the portal.
Yeah, well, somewhere where they don't got those problems, Stephen, that's in Athens, because them dogs just win again. That's all they do. Even when they don't play their best, they still find a way to not only win, but win by a rather convincing fashion here. And not that they blew Missouri out, because I thought the biggest takeaway, Stephen, was that Missouri's legit, like I thought they were. And toe-to-toe with the best of the best in Athens. Certainly some calls, interesting calls. We'll just put it there. I don't think that cost Missouri the game, but it sure as hell didn't help. What was your takeaways from Georgia winning 30-21 over Mizzou?
I think it's another indicator of why I like Georgia as the best team in college football. They're tested time and time again, and they keep answering the bell. We saw this in the second half. Game kind of hanging in the balance. Georgia answers the bell. Defensively, they step up with a couple plays. Carson Beck and the offense do just enough. I would say it's probably not Georgia's best game, but also I think Missouri played a lot of played a role in that too. So I think we've talked a lot about Georgia and kind of where they are this year. I think they're still molding into the team that can win it all because of some of the injuries they've had. We've seen McConkey play well the last couple of weeks. Brock Bowers will be back. Jamon Dumas-Johnson will certainly be missed if he misses a couple games. But this is a team that's got they may not be as good as they were last year, and I think that's probably true, but they are also good enough to win it all. And when they've been tested, they keep answering the bell, especially in the second half.
Yeah. And what about Missouri? They're showing in this game. I thought they were particularly strong on the line of scrimmage, got after Carson Beck. They were able to run the ball quite effectively on Georgia's defense. I certainly didn't see that coming. And, Brady Cook, not his best day, but he was making some tough throws out there too. And I don't want to call it improvising because that's the wrong word, but I'm thinking of 3 or 4 snaps. It's like he didn't even know the ball was there. And it's in his hands, and usually that's a recipe for disaster. And he was converting them into first downs somehow. So I thought a strong showing. And, I don't believe in moral victories. I'm not calling this a victory. But if I'm a Missouri fan, this gives me confidence that we can beat everybody else on the schedule.
Yeah, 100%. I actually moved Missouri up in my rankings. I don't know why they were penalized so much in some of the AP and the coaches. I moved them up. I actually have them, I think, at 12 in the country. They acquitted themselves well against the number 1 team in the country, and frankly, 2 years in a row. So I think that's a credit to Eli Drinkowitz. And I think if I was, a Missouri fan, I would be encouraged with the staff hires, the fact that they're recruiting well, their work in the portal. They seem to have good. Blake Baker and Kirby Moore were 2 good coordinator hires, and they seem to be hitting on some of their personnel evaluations through the portal and certainly recruiting. I thought my big takeaway from this game for Missouri is I just wanted to take a second and just appreciate the season that they had. And I think we often, we talk all the time about how, what does this game mean for the playoff? What does it mean for this championship? Missouri could win 10 games for the first time, I think, since 2014 or so. And they've taken the number 1 team in the country to the brink 2 years in a row. And this was a team that had expectations of being a 5, 6, 7 win team by Vegas. And we're talking about them as potentially a 10 win team, maybe 11 if they win their bowl game this year. So Saturday's game did nothing to, I think, take away from the season that Missouri had. If anything, I think it only added to it because of how well they played against the team that I would vote number 1 in the country. So I think just an appreciation for Missouri and what they did. And I think it also just goes back to the idea that not everything has to be about the playoff. We can appreciate the season that Missouri had. And because they don't make the playoff, it doesn't mean they're a bad team. In fact, I think their showing on Saturday should get them more respect than they're getting.
Yeah, and it's got to give you a confidence in the future, I would think, under Missouri football. Because, hell, you got to remember, coming into this year, he was on one of the hot seats in the SEC. And, I think he's probably the front runner right now for SEC Coach of the Year.
100%. I would vote Eli Drinkowitz SEC Coach of the Year at this point. And kind of like I was getting at, I think if I was a Missouri fan, I would have come into this year sort of uncertain about where things are because you just hired a new offensive coordinator from Fresno State. You had a quarterback last year in Brady Cook who was banged up and, he didn't play well. And frankly, we all probably should have talked about the shoulder injury a little bit more, considering how significant it was to his performance. And this year, they've taken Brady Cook from, 13th, 14th in the preseason and quarterback rankings to a guy who could be all SEC by the end of the year. The defense under Blake Baker got a lot better last year and is still solid this year. So they, if I was a Missouri fan, like the future looks very bright here. Like Drinkowitz came into the season on the hot seat. He could be coach of the year. And I think you feel better about a lot of these things going forward just because of how the season has played out.
Yeah. All right. So I don't know if you could tell, Stephen, but I've been delaying because I don't want to talk about this. But Alabama keeps on winning. It's what they do. They give you hope. If you're an opponent that they can be defeated. And right out the gate, LSU stops them right down the field. It's like, by God, LSU's going to do this. Even right before halftime, going the length of the field in a minute, touchdown. They come out the other side, touchdown. LSU's cooking. But really, they were just cooked because Alabama dominated the second half again. I just saw this stat. I don't fact check anything, Stephen. I just share whatever I'm told. But this sounds right. Against Ole Miss, A&M, Tennessee, and LSU, Alabama's 4 toughest SEC games to date. Alabama's outscored them in the second half 82-13. My God, that's impressive. That, as much as it pains me to say it, Stephen, that's championship football right there.
It is. And I think the interesting thing about Alabama is, at times this year, they have been so inconsistent. And it's kind of like Georgia. They just find a way to meet the moment, to do what they need to do to win the game. And they step up at when the stage is the biggest. And certainly that was Saturday night. That the first half of that game was fun. I mean, you had Jayden Daniels and Jalen Milroe just going back and forth, and the high level at which both were playing, and it looked like it was going to be an all-timer, like a 42-49 kind of game. But I think to go back to the preseason or the pregame discussion about this, the weakest link on the field was LSU's defense, and they just could not get a stop. I mean, Alabama, 11 of 14 on third down conversions. Jalen Milroe's efficiency, just taking what LSU was giving him, the plays where he was about to be tackled and flips it to the running back for a big pass. You had the plays on the ground by Jalen Milroe. So, Milroe's a guy that I think my confidence level in him gets more and more, it gets higher every week. And certainly we've seen what Alabama's defense can do. So it was a great first half. I was kind of hoping for a little bit more fireworks, but I think basically that almost locks Alabama in for the SEC West Championship.
And is Matt House reaching Marcus Satterfield range for you, Stephen?
I think Matt House is a better coordinator than that. I am puzzled as to why LSU has been so shaky on defense this year. Now, granted, they are missing Mekhi Wingo, and they've had a lot of misses in the secondary. And I think that's the one area, especially a team like LSU, where they have so much pride in their defensive backs, and they have been so necessary to go into the portal the last 2 years. It was more 1 year fix last year. This year it was more multi-year fixes, and what the status of Deuce Chestnut and Denver Harris, and one of the corner from Ohio State gets hurt and is out for the year. So they've had bad luck with their portal gets at corner, and I think it's, in fairness to Matt House, I would probably give him a little. I don't know. LSU fans probably aren't going to give him too much time here, but I would like to see what he could do with a more functioning secondary this year. But the regression has been very alarming across the board for that defense.
Now, how about Kentucky beating Mississippi State 24-3 on the road? I mean, I think the nicest thing I can say is they snapped their Starkville losing streak. But man, this was a hard one to watch for me.
Yeah, I was going to say that 20-play, 88-yard drive that Mississippi State had, I think it was a nice audition for the Big Ten West, because that was the kind of ball that Northwestern and Iowa were playing up at Wrigley on Saturday. But no, you're right. I mean, it was a hard one to watch at the same time as LSU Alabama. You had LSU Alabama on one screen with both offenses just going back and forth, and Kentucky and Mississippi State struggling to get to 300 yards offensively. So just totally different worlds at the same time in the SEC. I think the takeaway, though, for me is we talk about how hard it is to win. Well, Kentucky goes on the road to a tough place to play, gets a victory where they clearly don't play their best. And I think that's a big deal for Kentucky, just to snap the losing streak this season, snap the losing streak on the road, and to get the victory and to get to 6 wins. So I think just getting the victory is a big deal for Kentucky. On the other side of things, the offensive woes for Mississippi State just continue. And you look at the schedule, the winnable games are starting to get smaller as we get deeper into November and trying to get to a bowl game.
Yeah, on a scale of 1 to 10, Stephen, 1 being not likely at all, and 10 being, an absolute lock, what percentage do you give Zach Arnett of returning as head coach of Mississippi State next season?
Man, that's a tough one.
Oh, he's here.
I'd probably say above maybe 50%, so maybe like a 6 at this point. I think, these next 3 games are going to be pretty critical, obviously. Southern Miss should be a victory, and then Ole Miss in the season finale, the Egg Bowl. Like, if you can beat Ole Miss at your place, that probably solidifies Zach Arnett's case to come back next year. I think if you lose all 3 of them, I think there's definitely a coaching change. I also think too, there's also the look test, if you will, like how are you playing? And certainly they did not pass that on Saturday night. They just looked very listless offensively. If they get Will Rogers and Woody Marks back this week, that could be significant as they go to Texas A&M. But I think right now, and it's kind of, to me, it's like it's 50-50 kind of hanging in the balance, just because of, you work for an athletic director that didn't hire you, and the performance this season, I would argue, is underachieving relative to the talent that they have in the program.
Yeah. Another game where it was not very competitive. Auburn beats Vanderbilt 31-15, but it was kind of the Jarquez Hunter show. He just ran wild, and then I think they kind of parked the bus, to borrow a soccer term there, but they didn't really have to do much, and as soon as Peyton Thorne threw a pick 6, I think they were saying, all right, that's enough of that.
Yeah, for sure. I think the takeaway is kind of like my takeaway for Kentucky is that Auburn just went on the road and got a good win in SEC play, and they moved one step closer to a bowl game in Hugh Freeze's first year, which is the goal. And so I think, to your point, the encouraging thing, if you're an Auburn fan, is the play of Jarquez Hunter the last couple weeks. The big plays, the production, it's all been there. You're starting to see some good signs out of the running game. Passing game still needs some work, whether it's drops by the receiver, quarterback receiver on the same page, whatever it is. You mentioned the pick 6. It was horrendous. There's no other way to get around that if you're Auburn. So I think just finding ways to win with the personnel that you have this season is key for Auburn. Jarquez Hunter is a big part of that. Must-win game, and they got it. I think that's the takeaway for me for Auburn.
Yeah. And Tennessee won by nearly 60 points. What a performance, Steve. What a performance against UConn. I get it. Yeah. But anything stand out for you in that one?
Absolutely. I'll say it again. How about some Joe Mentum? Joe Milton played well the last couple of weeks. I think maybe you or I could have probably hit one of those passes to wide open receivers. But no, I always think for Tennessee, and it was important too for South Carolina, a game you were favored, get the victory, play as many people as you can, and don't get anybody hurt. And that kind of a game could be important because of the stretch that Tennessee has coming up with Missouri and Tennessee. So the timing of it was helpful, but Tennessee did exactly what they needed to do in a game they should have dominated.
Yeah, speaking of a game you should have dominated, but didn't there, Stephen? South Carolina, Jacksonville State, 10-point win, 38-28. But really, if you paid close attention, if you actually watched this game, Jacksonville State was going for the win. They were down 3, and they threw a pick 6 in the red zone. Heartbreaker for old Rich Rod, who may be the next Mississippi State coach. Who knows? But, man, I don't know. Thank God they got Spencer Rattler, and thank God they got Xavier Legette. He's awesome, even though he's banged up. Because if they didn't have those two guys, I don't know if South Carolina would have won a game this year.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think my the funniest thing was I was going to say they won with defense because they returned to pick six, and after all that criticism this year, that they did, the defense came through. But no, it was a game that South Carolina had to sweat probably way more than you probably wanted to. During the week there was some, I think, chatter about Jacksonville State being a potential upset pick, someone who could at least cover. And their style of play is difficult, just with the way they can run the ball and kind of possess it. They didn't necessarily control time of possession on Saturday, but they can be pesky because of their style of play. So to your point, the takeaway for me is it wasn't maybe South Carolina's best game, but they still won. And Spencer Rattler and Leggett were awesome. We need to get Tonka in the end zone for South Carolina, but avoiding the upset, escaping disaster is probably the best thing you could say for South Carolina.
Yeah. Well, and then we're going to do, you've got some bowl projections, Stephen. But before we get to that, real quick, I wanted to ask you just, thoughts on, speaking of South Carolina, and we got a couple more here for you, but let's just stick with the Gamecocks for now. But how likely is it that you think that the Gamecocks do make a bowl? They got 3 games left, got to win them all. But they're all at home. Vanderbilt, Kentucky, Clemson. You could talk me into they can beat all those teams. But you could talk me into probably losing the 2 of them. So I don't know where you at with the Gamecocks.
Probably about, I guess maybe just over 50%, maybe like 52, 53 confidence level that they will get to a bowl game. Saying all that, I would say after last weekend's games, my confidence level dwindled just a little bit because of how they played. Also, Clemson took care of business against Notre Dame. So a finale that looked a little bit more winnable a couple weeks ago, Clemson played pretty well on Saturday. We'll have to see if that carries forward. But I think the fact that these games are at home, and we've mentioned it, just how well Shane Beamer's team seemed to play in the month of November. If you can get Juice Wells back, if you can get some guys healthy at the line of scrimmage, I think South Carolina can win all 3 of these games. So I think they're right there on the bubble for me, like 52, 53% that they will get bowl eligible.
But you do think it probably Clemson is the toughest hurdle for them?
Yeah, I think so. I think just the way that Clemson played last week and the way that Clemson's built, especially with their havoc that they can bring on the defensive line, could be pretty problematic. Now, saying all that, South Carolina had a pretty impressive win last year in Death Valley. So I think if this game was on the road, I think I would be a lot less optimistic. But I think the fact that South Carolina could be 5-6, and I like desperate teams in the final week of the season. I think South Carolina, that gives them a chance to steal that one against Clemson.
Now, how about same thing for Arkansas? Likelihood them making the postseason, same scenario. They got 3 home games, but they must win every single one of them. Auburn at home this week, Florida International the week after, and Missouri there to close out the regular season. How likely is it that you think Arkansas makes a bowl?
How about a bold prediction for you?
Uh-oh.
Let's say this. Arkansas beats Auburn. They find a way to beat Missouri.
Yeah.
I like desperate teams going to that final week of the season. Arkansas sitting there at 5-6, need to fight to get bowl eligibility. I think I've heard 5-6, a team that needs to win in the Arkansas-Missouri series before. So how about that? Bold prediction. If Arkansas beats Auburn, I think they can beat Missouri and get to a bowl game.
Now, having said that, though, which one do you think is the tougher matchup? Is it Missouri, who I could certainly, I think that is right as of today. You could easily make that case, and you'd be right. But Missouri's also got Tennessee coming up, Florida coming up. And if they drop 1 or 2 of those, I mean, who knows? It could be a really rattled team. So taking that into consideration, Auburn or Missouri, which one is the tougher hurdle?
I think it's Missouri, just because I think Missouri's just a better team. They just present more challenges for Arkansas. I think Arkansas, the way they match up against Auburn this weekend is pretty interesting. And I think if they can just keep that momentum going offensively and with some of the offensive issues that Auburn has had, I would feel fairly optimistic if I'm Arkansas about that game. The Missouri one seems a little tougher to me.
Right. Now, we've already kind of hit on Florida a little bit, but same thing with them, but a little bit different scenario. They've got 3 games left. They only have to win 1, but it's an unforgiving schedule. At LSU, at Missouri, and Florida State. What's your confidence level that Florida can get one of those?
Pretty low. I think that's the thing that disappoints you probably if you're a Florida fan was the Arkansas game was the most gettable game that you could have down the stretch. At LSU this week, we'll see if Jayden Daniels plays for LSU. On the road at Missouri, you mentioned the stretch for Missouri. Does that catch up to them at all? Florida State, the last year's game was a little bit back and forth in Tallahassee. Maybe this year in Gainesville, if you're Florida, you can get some revenge over your in-state rival. As strange as it sounds, if I was a Florida fan, that Florida State game in the finale might be the one you can maybe steal because the other 2 are road games. But I would say before last week, fairly high confidence level. I would say it's dropping, especially after Saturday's loss for Florida to get to a bowl game.
And then last one, Mississippi State. They need to get 2 here at A&M this upcoming week. Southern Miss at home and the Egg Bowl, Ole Miss at home. Confidence level that Mississippi State finds a way to turn things around and win a couple games here.
Pretty low. I think optimistically, Will Rogers, Woody Marks, they spark the offense. Maybe they can steal the Ole Miss game on Thanksgiving. I think they will definitely get Southern Miss, which means one of the 2, they have to find a way to pull off an upset. So I think fairly low confidence at this point for Mississippi State to get to 6 wins.
I can hear that fairly low in your voice, Stephen. Not looking good for that.
Yeah. So am I crazy on any of those, or you think that's pretty? Would you agree with those?
I mean, I'm trying not to get too excited about Arkansas. You might be crazy, but I've said the same thing. So if you're crazy, so am I. But that's not saying much because I think I am. But I kind of feel I don't know. I don't know what to make of Florida, Stephen. I really don't. But I think they steal one. I don't know if it's they might. I hate you hate injuries, but that could really help them this week if Jayden Daniels doesn't play. And for some reason, I think they can beat Missouri. I don't think I wouldn't pick it, but I wouldn't be stunned by it either, if that makes sense.
No, I think that's totally fair, and I think that's one of the things that I wrestle with once we get into November and we start looking at bowl projections, because it does feel like somebody's going to get picked off in an upset. I don't know where it happens sometimes, and it's sort of like you just have to leave the door open because we're going to get a little chaos. And to your point, Florida with Jayden Daniels injured, and you look at the rest of the slate, they have to play at Missouri, and of course they get Florida State. I think they could pick off one of those. I don't think it's crazy. I think they could, and I think the same thing could be said for Mississippi State. Desperation in the Egg Bowl to trying to get 6 wins. I don't think that's crazy to think that we're going to have an upset or two when especially when rivals play with something on the line. Right.
And one other, Dabo, quiet. I'm gonna name him Dabo if he keeps barking. But that's South Carolina. If they can beat, surely they can beat Vanderbilt. If not, we got real problems. But if they can get over Kentucky, because there's bad blood there, and Kentucky's owned them. Hell, Clemson has too. But if they can beat Kentucky, I think I'm going to give them Clemson, I think, because I think they'll have some confidence, because there just seems to be some bad mojo right now. There's injuries. There's just a lot going on in Columbia, and they need some momentum. And I'm trying not to be completely disrespectful to Vanderbilt, but I don't think that gives you momentum. I really don't. I think you got to beat Kentucky, and if you can get those 2 in a row, I really think Clemson, they're a joke. Come on, that's a win. You know what?
I think the important thing, we're at that point of the season where you're trying to win and extend your season. Right. Because each win starts stacking up to get those practices for the bowl game, and you get a postseason trip out of it. So it's sort of like a mini playoff for South Carolina. So I think, to your point, they're obviously they'll be favored to beat Vanderbilt. I think the question is, can you get healthy and get better at the line of scrimmage. We've seen some things when they had the full lineup out there, they were able to do some things offensively, especially against Florida. If they can get Juice Wells back, all of a sudden that makes those last two more winnable. And to your point, I kind of forgot about the whole Stoops and Beamer, sunglasses and everything else. So it could be a spicy November 18th meeting. Could be a little chilly in Columbia. It could be pretty spicy between the two of them.
Yeah, and that was the last thing I was going to say on it, Stephen, where it's not the season you hope for Kentucky, but I bet you this is one that would be so sweet for Mark Stoops. If he can crush South Carolina's postseason hopes, I think he's going to want that one more than short of maybe Tennessee. This weekend would be a signature win. But, I mean, Georgia, obviously. But aside from those, I think South Carolina's one he wants more than short of almost any other. You know what?
As long as he doesn't follow that up with a loss to Louisville, I think Kentucky fans would probably agree with you.
Take a little break from the show to remind y'all that we're brought to you by MyBookie. Head on over to mybookie.ag today and put in that promo code, ThatSEC. They're willing to give you right now, our listeners, exclusive offer, the $200 cash bonus, $200 to gamble with today over at MyBookie for anybody that uses that promo code, ThatSEC, ThatSEC. There's also a link in the show notes to do this over at MyBookie. Sign up for a new account, get that $200 cash bonus with that promo code, ThatSEC. This is the number one way to help the podcast stay independent. Take advantage of this sponsorship opportunity. We're also brought to you by Prize Picks. Don't forget Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports over at Prize Picks with that promo SEC. They're willing to match your initial deposit up to $100. So you're going to put in $100, you'll have $200 to play with at the prizepicks.com daily fantasy sports. And once again, take advantage of these sponsorship opportunities. Help the podcast grow and stay independent, most importantly. All right, so let's get into the games here this upcoming weekend, Steve. We got some good ones here. And I want to start with Ole Miss at Georgia. Game of the week. CBS used up too many Georgias already, so they've kind of ruined themselves. Otherwise, this would be a CBS game. But, thoughts on Ole Miss going down to Athens? Athens, Cousin Shane said it best. I don't know if you're a fan of the Predator movie, Stephen, but, when they find out, hey, it bleeds. If it bleeds, we can kill it. That's what he said about Georgia. Nobody can kill Georgia, but it does look like Georgia can bleed, so to speak. So, and I like a lot of what Ole Miss has. They're very balanced. I think Jackson Dart's playing his best football. They're getting their receivers back. Priestcorn at tight end has been huge for them. Judkins is running harder than he's ran since last year. So there's optimism in Oxford. They ain't scared of the Dogs. Now everybody says they ain't scared till they play them, and then they get scared pretty quick most of the time, unless you're Missouri.
Like the whole Mike Tyson thing, you were good with him until you stepped in the ring, and then you had to.
Right. Exactly. So, what's your thoughts on this showdown? And heck, I mean, it's an outside shot. I get it, but I think if Ole Miss wins this game, I think they deserve playoff consideration. And again, they may not get there, but 11-1 with a win over the best team in the country on the road, I think that's going to be better than any win anybody's got. So if chaos ensues, I think Ole Miss deserves a playoff spot if they win this and win out.
And not to mention, if they are 11-1, I guess short of Alabama losing its last two games, they wouldn't have to play in the SEC championship game. So they could be the biggest Georgia fan to root for Georgia to beat Alabama. So there's a lot at stake here for Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. So I think, first of all, my question, for Ole Miss is, Missouri wasn't intimidated by the environment. I thought they went in there and they played well on Saturday. If you're Ole Miss, can you go in there and can you do the same thing? Can you meet the moment? Because Georgia's going to, we know what to expect out of Georgia. They're going to find a way in the second half to probably win this game. So I think if you're Ole Miss, I think there are some things that you can do that we've seen teams take advantage of and try to beat Georgia. And I think some of that's quarterback runs. We saw Brady Cook do that. on Saturday. We saw Peyton Thorne when Auburn played Georgia. So you're going to need to get Jackson Dart involved on the ground. Quinshad Judkins, he's been coming on strong the last couple of weeks, like you mentioned. Cody Schrader found some running room too. And so I think if you're Ole Miss, you're looking at this going, arguably, we're probably better offensively. And I mean, am I crazy to think that Ole Miss has a better quarterback and running back than Missouri here?
No. I mean, Brady Cook's played outstanding, but no, I think I would tend to the combo. Certainly, I would lean Ole Miss for sure.
Yeah, I think so too. And so I think if you're Ole Miss, that's the argument. Like you have Jackson Dart, who's improved. He's grown as a passer. You have a better running back in Quinshad Judkins, and that's no disrespect to Missouri. I think Ole Miss is just a little bit better. I think if you're Ole Miss, you can use some of the things that's Missouri did. You can maybe hit some big plays in the passing game. Trey Harris, making ridiculous catches on the sideline, one-handed, maybe needed again for Ole Miss. I think where I wonder if Ole Miss can match up will be defensively. Are you able to, especially because that second half against Texas A&M was pretty shaky, are they going to be able to go into Athens and get stops? And I think that's the big question for me in this game is what can Ole Miss do defensively to match what Missouri did, get some pressure on Carson Beck and try to steal one in Athens.
If it is a shootout, and I'm not saying it will because Georgia's got a great defense, but if it's a shootout, what's your confidence level that Carson Beck can outduel Jackson Dart?
Pretty confident. I think we've seen that, kind of like what we were talking about a little bit ago, was it seems like every time when Georgia is challenged this year, whether it's South Carolina, it was Carson Beck in the second half. It was Auburn. It was Carson Beck to Brock Bowers. On Saturday, I don't, maybe he didn't have his best game on Saturday, but I still think the combination of the weapons and his ability, I still think that I would have a lot of confidence in Georgia to answer a potential high scoring game with Ole Miss. And of course, too, hey, Brock Bowers may come back. Who knows? We haven't gotten there's no definitive timetable on him. And of course, Jamon Dumas-Johnson being out for Georgia could be pretty significant too on the defensive side.
Right. But they're getting innovative. Don't forget.
Yeah.
How about Tennessee at Missouri? I think this is going to be a heck of a game. Missouri opened as a slight favorite. So it already immediately shifted to Tennessee. And, I think this is a true coin toss. And I don't know. I mean, you could easily make the case Missouri's been the better team. I think you could also say Tennessee's heating up at the perfect time. So Tennessee's dominated Missouri back-to-back years, but that doesn't mean anything for this year because, again, Missouri's significantly better than they have been under any time under Drinkwitz. So thoughts on this matchup?
I think if you're Missouri, you can't let Georgia beat you twice. You can't have a hangover from losing to Georgia and let it hurt you here because the path to winning 10 games goes through Tennessee and it goes through Florida and it goes through Arkansas. You still have a lot to play for here. And looking ahead, we talk about Ole Miss and potential being a playoff spoiler. If Missouri wins out, they could be sitting there at top 10, top 12 at the end of the year. And that could mean big things for maybe going to like the Peach Bowl, could mean the Cotton Bowl. So there's still a lot at stake here for Missouri. So this feels very even at first glance to me. Like you have two teams that, we know Tennessee, the rushing attack has been there all season. Milton has been playing better. I think there seems to be some confidence in the receiver play over the last couple of weeks too. Tennessee has scored 60 points in back-to-back games against Missouri. So there's a lot of, I would say a lot of motivation for Missouri defensively to show up this week too. So this one feels very much like a coin toss. And it almost feels like to me, which quarterback steps up and delivers in the clutch? Because these two teams can kind of go where the quarterback goes. And so does Milton play well on the road or do you have Brady Cook at home rebounding after the loss to Georgia? I think it's pretty even, and it's a pretty fascinating matchup.
Would you agree, though, that at least in my mind, the biggest mismatch potentially in this game, Tennessee's defensive backs going up against Missouri's receivers, I think that heavily favors Missouri. That could be a real problem on Saturday.
Yeah, it really can. And especially since Haddon's out for the rest of the year, going on the road to play Burden and some of the other weapons that Missouri has, it is going to be a real challenge. But I think if you're Tennessee, maybe the counter to that is, the pass rush has been there all season. So to some extent, if you can get some pressure, can you create some havoc, you sort of protect your secondary. So line of scrimmage really on both sides of the ball critical, because Tennessee's going to have to find some ways to protect the secondary and to get after Brady Cook. And then I think if you're Tennessee, or certainly Missouri, like how do you slow down that running game for Tennessee? Because we've seen, Milton has been playing better the last couple of weeks, and so I think it'll be interesting to see how Tennessee approaches this game. Does Milton get off to a fast start? Do they lean on the run? Can Missouri force Milton to beat them through the air? There's a lot of interesting matchups, but it all plays really off the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, that Joe Mentum that you've coined.
Right.
I mean, how much the last 2 weeks, and I realize, or I guess 3 weeks, yeah, go back to Alabama, even though that was a loss. But how much of the last 3 weeks has changed your opinion, if at all, on Joe Milton going into a big matchup like this on the road in the SEC, and gives you confidence that he can win it?
I feel better if I'm Tennessee, and I have more confidence in Tennessee's passing game here. Now they may come out and they may struggle on Saturday, and it may have just been a kind of a fluky stretch of ball here for the Volunteers. But I think just when you go into Tuscaloosa and play well, and I think that would give him some confidence, and Kentucky to go on the road and play Missouri well. So I have more confidence, and I think Tennessee, we've seen them too. When they played Texas A&M, they were, A&M was strong up front. They still found ways to move the ball on the ground. I think they can do that here as well.
All right, how about this matchup, Stephen? Alabama going on the road at Kentucky. So an opportunity for the Crimson Tide to lock up the West Division. Kentucky, get some momentum. Won last week after 3 straight losses. This is another one. We don't know fully the status of Kentucky quarterback Devin Leary. He got knocked out's the right word, because he did come back and play, but then they took him out quickly after and didn't play again. What's your read on this game? Any shot? Let's just assume Devin Leary plays, because I think without him it's an easy one. But any shot that Kentucky shocks the world and can knock off Alabama?
I think a slim chance, but I think anytime Alabama playing LSU, now going on the road, you always worry about a letdown in these cases. It's for any team in the country, regardless of whether it's Alabama, Ohio State, or whoever it is. After you play a big game and then you go on the road, we've also seen Alabama be a little inconsistent at times. The full 60 minutes sometimes haven't been there. The longer that Kentucky can make this interesting, and maybe they can find a way in the fourth quarter to keep it close, they have a chance. I think a lot of it goes back to, number one, like you said, Devin Leary has to be healthy. And number two, they've got to find some ways to get Ray Davis going, because that run game just hasn't been there the last couple weeks. And it's a pretty heavy lift for Kentucky, I think, to win this game. They're probably going to need some breaks, maybe like a special teams touchdown, maybe like a turnover or two. But right now, with the way that Alabama's been playing, may not be consistent, but I think they'll find a way to win here.
And just go with me here. I listened to everything you just said, Stephen, but let's just say Kentucky does it and they win. Again, this is not the season that any Kentucky fan really wanted outside of that Florida win. But if they were to get this massive upset here, does that kind of not that he needs a clean slate, but is it kind of like, is the season? I don't know if it's success is the right word, but I mean, this would be the biggest win under Mark Stoops, I have to believe. And I guess the real question is, what would that do for the Kentucky program, do you think?
I think to your point, we had talked a couple weeks ago about where Kentucky is under Mark Stoops. And I think, I don't think he's a top 10 coach in college football, but I think he's one of the top 25. And I think the levels at which he's raised the program, I think it's fair to wonder, like, how do you go to the next level? Well, you go to the next level by beating Alabama, and you get them at your place. This is arguably not one of Nick Saban's best teams, but they're getting better during the course of the season. So if you can win this game, you can find a way to win. I think it only solidifies sort of probably the credit that Mark Stoops deserves at Kentucky. They're kind of like Missouri at Georgia. They're playing with house money here. They're the underdog. They have nothing to lose. Everybody's going to pick Alabama. I'm picking Alabama, so that they have nothing to lose here. If they win, it would be one of those upsets that we haven't seen this year that we could get on Saturday.
Yeah. All right. How about this one, Stephen? Auburn at Arkansas. Hugh Freeze, Sam Pittman. Round 2, different teams, but round 2. Played last year. Liberty upset Arkansas in Fayetteville. This one's also in Fayetteville, of course. Arkansas has to win to keep their bowl hopes alive. Auburn, still not bowl eligible. They need a win. Even if they don't get it here. They got New Mexico State coming up, so they're feeling pretty good about that. But thoughts on this matchup? A fairly limited Auburn team, I think it's fair to say. Going up against a Razorback team that's got new life.
Yeah, I think desperation is probably a fair term for both here, because if you're Auburn, you're trying to get to 6 wins. If you're Arkansas, you're trying to get to 6 wins too, but you also have a very narrow path. Like every game is a mini playoff for this team. So I think desperation for both. But I think, there's also like this game on paper just looks pretty even to me. I know Auburn's pretty limited in what they can do offensively. Arkansas has been good against the run. It's a good matchup for Jarquez Hunter. Can Arkansas continue the momentum that we saw offensively against Florida? Can they build on that here against an Auburn defense that's stronger in the secondary than they are against the pass? So I think there's a lot at stake for both teams, but also in the big picture, I want to see any kind of growth from Auburn's passing game, any kind of growth from Arkansas offensively. They had 2 weeks to get ready for Florida, a little bit quicker turnaround here. Auburn now has a week to adjust too. So there's some interesting intricacies in the matchup between Auburn and Arkansas.
What if, is it as simple as, and this is not simple by any means, but if you could slow down Jarquez Hunter, does Auburn have any shot in this game?
I don't think so. I think if you're Arkansas, I think you have to aim to stop Jarquez Hunter, because if not, the growth of the offense for Auburn revolves around, the run game and getting Hunter going. Saying that, I think Peyton Thorne at times this year, he's been able to get something going through the air, but they have been just so inconsistent in the passing game. And it's not all on the quarterback. Some of it could be scheme, it could be it could be the pass catchers, it could be the offensive line. They're just not there yet in the passing game. So I think if I'm Arkansas, I want to put them in long yardage situations throughout the night, and I want to make them beat me through the air. Also, I think in a tight game like this, like we saw this against BYU, whether it's turnovers, special team stuff, short yardage, if you're Arkansas, I think you need to check all those small boxes. In a game like this, 1 or 2 mistakes could be pretty significant, I think.
Yeah, and one thing this is probably way too early to even ask you this, Stephen, but if, let's say Arkansas, what'd they score? 30, did they score 39? 39 against Florida. It wasn't overtime, but let's say 36, because that's what it was in regulation. If they average something like 36 points per game to close it out, do you think there's a shot that Kenny Guyon is your next offensive coordinator?
I think so. I think there's a chance. I think you have to be impressed with him. To be able to be a first-time play caller, to go on the road, and the offense to look better in a situation against, I wouldn't say Florida's one of the better defenses in the SEC, but still, you're talking about going on the road to Gainesville and having a good showing, with basically being handed the playbook in 2 weeks and being able to cut it down and to get something going. I thought I was really impressed by him. And he's a former quarterback at Ohio State, so I think that certainly helps the connection with KJ Jefferson and sort of understanding where this offense needs to go. It's a 3-game audition for him to be offensive coordinator. If he continues to impress, Arkansas's offense continues to get better, I think you absolutely have to consider him for the full-time job.
Mm-hmm. All right, how about the team they beat last week, Florida, going on the road at LSU? Again, we don't know Brian Kelly came out today and said it'll be about Wednesday before we know. I don't know what that means, but I guess maybe concussion type deal. But so I don't know where you want to go with this one, Steve. Maybe we two different ways. If Jayden Daniels plays, thoughts on this game. If he doesn't, does it change anything? Garrett Nussmeier, one of the better backups in the SEC. He's not quite as experienced, but we've seen him on the field, and we've seen what he can do. He's not Jayden Daniels, but he's not awful by any means. So what's your thoughts on this one? And again, this is one where Florida desperately, they need a win, and maybe they can steal it here in a rivalry game. How about, I don't know if you saw this, Stephen. LSU's won 4 in a row against Florida. They've never won 5. So this could be an opportunity for some history here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is, and not wanting to root for any kind of injuries or anything like that, but I think if you're Florida, you would probably rather play Garrett Nussmeier. I think Jayden Daniels is either going to be first or second team All-America by the end of the year. Not a slight on Nussmeier. You would just rather play the guy that doesn't have as many starts, isn't as dynamic on the ground as Jayden Daniels. So I think if you're Florida, it gets a little easier if you play Nussmeier. I think Daniels and his ability to make plays, carry the rushing attempts, a little harder to defend. I think Nussmeier would be a little bit easier of a matchup. I do think if you're Florida, there should be some optimism that they can move the ball through the air. Because, we talked about how bad LSU secondary has been this year, and, Graham Mertz and Pearsall and Wilson, that trio, and you get the ball maybe to ETN in space and get him some matchups. I think Florida can move the ball, and we've seen in this series weird things happen. It's been it's been crazy. Like you said, LSU's won 4 in a row. I think LSU at home is going to be very difficult to beat. But if I'm Florida, there's the kind of hint of desperation here, and maybe the anger, the hungry, be hungry to rebound after last week's disappointment to go on the road and play well at LSU. Wouldn't surprise me, and I think they can score. I just think it's probably going to be tough to win in Baton Rouge. So I like LSU in this one.
Yeah. All right, and then how about this one, Stephen? I've been calling this the Fired Bowl. Mississippi State at A&M. The losing coach should not be brought back. Shouldn't even be allowed to do his post-game presser. Thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, I was going to say, if Jimbo loses this one, considering how Mississippi State has played, they probably should do the Brett Bielema thing where they just politely escort him to a room off the field at Kyle Field as soon as the game ends and ask him what bank account would you like the buyout wired to, because it needs to be over after this one. So, I think what's funny about this series is if you haven't kept up with it, it's fine. Mississippi State's 5-2 in the last 7 against Texas A&M. They've had good success in this series. Now, a little bit different story this year with the offensive struggles for Mississippi State. I feel like a big mismatch is going to be A&M's defensive front against Mississippi State's offensive line. Also, Mississippi State's secondary has struggled going up against Max Johnson and Nia Smith, and we'll see if Evan Stewart comes back this week. There's a lot of matchups in here that don't favor Mississippi State in a game that, frankly, both coaches really need to win.
Yeah, that's understating it. How ridiculous! You just said it, 5-2 in the last 7, with a quarter of the budget. You know what I mean? Like, God. They ought to, when they fire Jimbo, they should just hand him that piece of paper that says that. You know what I mean? Like, this is why we're firing you, buddy.
That one and the stat you started with on the show, because if this one was in Starkville, considering A&M's road struggles, red sirens would be flashing here for potential upset for Texas A&M. But that sort of underscores it. Mississippi State does a good job of maximizing what they have in previous years. A&M, no doubt about it, they've underachieved under Jimbo Fisher with all the resources in the world.
Right, and to his credit, they've not quit on him, but they might in a scenario like this. I'm just saying, that's what I always look for when a coach is about to get fired. If the team's quit on him, and they didn't quit on him, they fought hard as hell against Ole Miss, but then they lost. So, all right, final one here. Stephen, Vanderbilt at South Carolina. Whew. Speaking about getting fired. Come on, Beamer. Come on. Who you going to blame if you lose this one? You know what?
Yeah, I would say it's probably advisable for Shane Beamer to win this one. Number one, for what we talked about earlier, trying to extend your season. In fairness to South Carolina, they've had a very difficult schedule this year. Expectations were around 5-7, 6-6. So they're not necessarily too far off the pace, but they can't lose this game. You can't lose to Vanderbilt. You can't be Vanderbilt's only win in SEC play this year. I don't mean that disrespectfully to Vanderbilt. They're just not very good this year. So it's a must-win game in a series that South Carolina has dominated. And it's almost as simple as this for me. South Carolina has Spencer Rattler, and they have one of the best receivers in the country right now, and Xavier Legette. And I think that's just simply the difference in a game.
Yeah. And you kind of gave some predictions there, Stephen. Any of these, like I like to ask you, that you're extremely confident that you know who will win as of Monday evening here, again, without knowing some of these quarterback availabilities, and then maybe, where a game or two that you're least confident about this weekend in the SEC?
Yeah, I think the ones that I'm probably the least confident in, Tennessee at Missouri, and also Auburn at Arkansas. They feel very much like 50-50 toss-ups. The other games, I actually feel pretty good about who I think is going to win. I think that's A&M, LSU, Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina. I would say Ole Miss and Georgia is probably closer to somewhere in the middle of high confidence and low confidence is probably a little bit closer to the middle. But I feel better about picking the winners of those five.
All right, then as promised, Steve has got something unique for us here. SEC Bowl projections. I know you do a deep dive on all this stuff over at Athlon Sports, this time of year. So what have you got for us in the SEC? And you could just, I guess, start at the top, the more marquee type bowl games. Who do you got there in the SEC?
Yeah, let's start at the college football playoff. I've got Georgia playing future SEC opponent, I guess SEC cousin this year, Texas, in the Sugar Bowl.
Wow.
That would be the 1 versus 4 matchup because I'm taking Georgia to be the number 1 seed eventually in the college football playoff.
Man, Sarkisian against Kirby. That's a heck of a matchup potentially with Quinn Ewers and that defense. Even Texas defense is pretty good, I believe.
Absolutely. Yeah, the defensive front for Texas kind of may have won them the game on Saturday against Kansas State and was a reason they are in this discussion this week for the college football playoff. But for Georgia, basically a home game, essentially at the Sugar Bowl to be the number 1 seed. That'd be a pretty big deal for them. But it'd be a fun matchup if that's what it works out, especially with what's looming in 2024 with these two teams.
Yeah. And I have heard, Stephen, that again, I don't follow the playoff stuff as closely because I'm just so SEC centric. But I've heard that the Big 12 needs help. That even a Texas, if they won out and won the conference championship, how confident are you that they make the playoff? Is it? I guess I would imagine it helps them massively that they have a win at Alabama, who's now kind of red hot.
Absolutely. I think if you're Texas, you are probably the biggest Alabama fans in the world right now. You want them to keep winning. I feel pretty good about the Big 12 champion, this being Texas, chances to make the playoff if they win out. 2 losses, it gets very dicey, but I think 12-1, Big 12 champion with a win over Alabama, I would put Texas in the playoff. Ohio State still has to play Michigan. We're not done with the losses at the top, I think.
So who is your other SEC playoff team?
No other playoff teams yet. But I do have some good news. If you're an Alabama or Ole Miss fan, I've got you in the New Year's Six after this week. I got Alabama in Nick Saban's favorite bowl game, the Cotton Bowl, playing old SEC friend Dan Lanning and Bo Nix. Bo Nix versus Alabama. That'd be a fun storyline. And Ole Miss in the Peach Bowl against Penn State, another old SEC friend in James Franklin.
What would it take for, let's say, Missouri or Tennessee to nab, I guess, either one of those? But I guess the one that I'm really looking at is Ole Miss because I'm just looking at the three teams that are having good seasons, but are very unlikely to win a division. What would it take? Because we have to assume in this scenario that Ole Miss loses at Georgia, so they're sitting there with 2 losses. Mizzou and Tennessee both have 2 losses. What's the likelihood that one of those two can steal that spot?
I would say very likely that one of those SEC teams is getting into the New Year's Six as we stand right now. I think a lot of those teams that are like 10 through 25 in the rankings, a lot of those are going to play each other, and there's probably going to be a lot of losing through there. I would say if you're 10-2, the odds of you getting to a New Year's Six bowl are pretty good. So I think if you're Missouri, that's sort of the goal the rest of the year. Win out. If you win out, you could be in the Peach Bowl. If you're Ole Miss at 10-2, even if you lose close, and they finish 10-2, they're going to be in good shape to get to a New Year's Six bowl game.
Yeah. And that UConn win is going to help Tennessee. Don't forget that. Right. All right.
Yeah. Tennessee's got some work to do, but a win over Missouri would certainly help them. And of course, a win over Georgia would help them out a lot too.
Yeah, that's kind of okay. I overlooked that one. Yeah, all right. Move on.
Yeah,
move on.
So I got a couple spicy bowl games here. How about the bowl game formerly known as the Outback Bowl? It's the ReliaQuest Bowl if you're scoring at home. It's Notre Dame versus LSU.
Ooh,
Brian
we've
Kelly.
seen that a couple times before, haven't we? Yeah.
Yeah.
With Brian. Oh man. Yeah. Oh man, you got me interested in that. That'd be a good one.
Yeah, I talk about like spicy coaching matchups. Brian Kelly against his old team. I mean, this is what we need in bowl season. We need some fun. We need some intrigue. I also like Tennessee in the Citrus Bowl against everyone's favorite offense, the Iowa Hawkeyes.
Man, Heupel will outscore them in 2 possessions. You know what?
Yeah, that's like one of the best defenses in the country against one of the most high scoring offenses in the country. It's the contrast in styles, but man, I gotta tell you, if you haven't watched Iowa's offense this year, man, you get introduced to it in the bowl game and you're like, how do people watch this for 13 weeks of the year?
Oh, I'm dreading it already.
Yeah. Hey, it'd be a good season though for Tennessee if they got to the Citrus Bowl. That puts them at probably 10-2 or 9-3. So
yeah. Let Nico play in the second half. That's all I got to say about that.
And that's a good point because teams in bowl games, the 4-game cutoff doesn't count. So any freshman or somebody you're redshirting that hasn't played this year can play in a bowl game. So there's even more incentive for some intrigue in some of these postseason games, keeping it interesting at least.
Yeah, no, I hadn't thought about that. It's a good point.
So a couple more here for you. I got the Gator Bowl. Speaking of intrigue, about some good news from Missouri, about Missouri versus Clemson in the Gator Bowl. I think that could be fun. I'm sure SEC fans wouldn't mind sending Dabo home with a loss there in Jacksonville. Also, I've got Mississippi State versus West Virginia in the Liberty Bowl. Now, I know we just talked Mississippi State not being bowl eligible, but they're on the bubble right now. As long as there's a chance for them to be in a bowl game, I'm going to include them in the SEC bowl predictions. Auburn versus Wisconsin in the Music City Bowl. Duke versus Kentucky in the Duke's Mayo Bowl. I mean, who wouldn't want to see Mark Stoops doused in mayo?
Yeah, I'll sign up for that.
Yeah, I think that's a Duke versus Kentucky. It sounds pretty good in basketball too. That's another interesting point about that one. In the Texas Bowl, I've got Oklahoma State versus Texas A&M. Could be old Big 12 rivals meeting up in Houston, and finally Florida in the Gasparilla Bowl against Georgia Tech. So Arkansas, South Carolina, just off the cutoff this week because of where if you want to throw maybe Arkansas in the Birmingham Bowl or South Carolina there, that would be your cutoff at this point as far as available SEC games and teams. There's scenarios, I think, where you could get 13 teams bowl eligible, and there's scenarios where the SEC might fall short in bowl eligible teams this year.
Yeah, I was talking to an Arkansas fan last week, and they were just like, man, I don't want to go to Birmingham. Like, they were like, we're too good to go to. It was like, you probably not going to make a bowl. This is before the Florida game. Like, they're like, yeah, but it's just funny how fans get where they're already picking their bowl game. They're not even bowl eligible yet. But hey, postseason is postseason. It helps you with practice. It helps you in a lot of ways. So, and I get people frown upon them and everything, but one last opportunity for you to watch your team this season, and it is what it is. I know I enjoy the heck out of them. And, a lot of people say they're irrelevant. I get it, but you lose it. Oh, man. There is hell to pay for these coaches if they don't win these games too. You know what?
Right. That's the thing is the bowl games are largely irrelevant, but they still mean something in the context of the season. They can really set the narrative for they played terrible in such bowl game. The defense was awful. Now it keeps the message boards alive for 3 more weeks. But hey, it's more football in December and January. I mean, to me, it's like, let's bring them on. I want to watch every team one more time in a bowl game. So I'll never complain about how many bowl games there are.
Right. And one thing, I'm sure people will ask about this, Stephen, but last year, I think it was the first one ever. It was the Las Vegas Bowl that they had in the new Raider Stadium. It's not SEC every year. It's every other year, if I understand it. So no, you didn't mention that, but that'll be on the rotation next year, right? Absolutely. So that's a key point is that game, I guess, switches with the Dukes Mayo Bowl. So it's gotcha. Big Ten. It's Big Ten in the Las Vegas Bowl this year. It was Big Ten in the Dukes Mayo Bowl last year. So they'll switch next year. That is something that next year with the 12-team playoff, it's a little murky how some of these things are going to work as far as bowl games. But yeah, that's why the Vegas Bowl isn't in there this year. It's just that it's rotating with the Dukes Mayo Bowl. Right. Well, Stephen, we went pretty long here. So any closing thoughts before we jump off the line? Man, I'm looking forward to another great weekend of games. Last Saturday was pretty epic. Like you said, the noon slate was awesome. The high-profile matchups lived up to the hype. I'm hopeful that Georgia, Ole Miss does as well this weekend, and maybe some of these kind of second-tier games also do as well. I'm really looking forward to Tennessee, Missouri. I think that one's probably one of the more even matchups across the weekend with a lot still at stake for both teams. Yeah, and the thing I love about this weekend's slate, Stephen, I mean, I can have a narrative for every single one of these games. They're all SEC. They're all critical for one reason or another. And I'm like you. I'm not quite as confident in some of the winners, but I'm torn. I'm torn on a lot of them. And I think that's going to make for a great Saturday. And some of these teams, like an Alabama, like an Auburn, like a Tennessee on the road, some of y'all may be leaning towards them, but it is not easy to win on the road in this league. So that just compounds the difficulty. So, which sets up for an even better week, in my opinion. Yeah, and hey, not to mention, we've only got, 4 of these left, unfortunately, counting the conference championship game. So I'm just trying to soak in and enjoy as many games as I can. Unfortunately, the November 18th slate is a little light across the SEC. So we got to enjoy November 11th, and then we got to enjoy the Thanksgiving slate coming up. Yeah, we may only spend about 10 minutes previewing that weekend of games. You know what? I think we may have to preview the transfer portal that weekend, for coach search weekend. All right, Steve, before you go, can you tell the audience where can they find you? Where can they find your work? Absolutely. So you can catch me on YouTube, all CFB 365. Please come over, subscribe, and check out some of the videos we got there. You can also check out my my podcast. It's a Cover 2 podcast with Athlon Sports. Me and Braden Gall, we go up on Wednesdays. We preview everything around college football, hit some of the big topics. So if you want to keep in touch with some of the things that's going on nationally, you can check us out at the Cover 2 podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Athlon Steven and Stephen L. CFB on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. And I'm also on Blue Sky at Stephen Lassan, by the way. So he's on all of them. So yeah. Just follow him on each and every platform. But Stephen, can't thank you enough. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I was just gonna say, man, I'm like the Big Ten. I'm like from Rutgers all the way over to Oregon and Washington. I'm everywhere. So. Well, have a good one, buddy, and can't wait to talk to you next week. Absolutely, man. Thanks as always for having me on. All right, so just want to say thanks again, Stephen, for joining the show. Appreciate it as always. I hope y'all got something out of that. because I know I do every time we speak with Steven and have him on this show. But, hey, that's all we got on this episode. We'll be back next. What we're going to plan on doing every Tuesday with the playoff rankings, we're going to go live. Probably should have led with that. Yeah, so Tuesday, just like last week, live after the playoffs predictions. We'll break that down live on the show and preview the week ahead, me and Cousin Shane. So be on the lookout for that. Tuesday night, 7 Eastern, 6 Central. That's about when we'll go live. But that's going to do it. Appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next one.